Welcome in, everybody, to Fantasy Pros. This is the Fantasy Football Podcast, and it's me, Joey P, Joe Pizzapia, and today it's Week 10. It's trade time. We're getting quicker and quicker to that trade deadline that's fast approaching in many leagues, so we got to make sure we're getting the right moves at the right time to help us win now, to help us win next week, to help us win through the playoffs, and of course, Andrew Erickson is here to help us break it all down, and another fantastic friend of the show, Alex Caruso, who does some work with us at Fantasy Pros. He is a very big deal on Twitter at Alex Caruso. He actually was able to get his own name on Twitter. We're also proud of him. He does work for Football Guys. He does a little for ESPN. He's super famous. He's a friend of the show, and he is still making himself smarter every single day attending university. I don't know how you have all the time, Alex, but we're happy you carved out some time for us, and it's time to press the guest right at the top of the show, as we always do on the trade targets. And we're going to start with the RBs, and I'm going to hit you with down to Foreman. Boy, oh boy, what a difference 2 weeks make. We had a guy who's scoring 3 touchdowns a couple weeks ago. Everybody was flying to the moon, and now we have a situation where Chuba Hubbard could be working his way back in. So, down to Foreman, are you buying, selling, or holding? What are you doing?
I'm probably selling D'Onta Foreman. I mean, I don't know what his price is going to sell for right now, so maybe I should be holding him. Sorry, let me take that back. I will hold him for another week because I don't think his value could be any lower. My biggest concern, he's not getting the passing down work. Chuba Hubbard played before him in the last game that they both played together, and this offense still is not going to be really good regardless of who is at quarterback. So I'm probably going to hold him and hope he has another big game because you probably can't sell him for too much right now.
I think that's some very wise, sage advice. I agree. I'm with you. I'm sure Andrew Erickson, you also agree, right? It's the time where you hold this guy because, look, if you sold him off the 3 touchdowns, you did well. If you're selling him this week, it's a whole different set of circumstances. But yet again, we know people are losing RBs every single week. We still got another Buy-Mageddon Part 2 coming up. So, Erickson, you that same mold there with Foreman? You just holding on right now and seeing if you can rebuild some of that value?
Yeah, I think that's the right move. You never want to sell for pennies on the dollar when you don't have to, especially with a guy like Foreman, who was a waiver wire pickup, so he doesn't have any draft capital attached to him. You know, he had no value for most of the season. So I don't think that anyone's going to be like, oh, well, now I got to, pay up to get D'Onta Foreman. Like, people won't want that. If anything, they'll try to wait and see if you drop him. If Chuba Hubbard has a bigger role when he comes back, and then people will scoop him up. So yeah, you got to hold him right now.
All right. Everybody knows that I like to try to tempt the fellas with some trades, talk about value because it's fun. It helps all of you too, trying to figure out, well, if I do want to trade D'Onta Foreman or if somebody offers me a deal, what does that value mean? So let's do it. Let's start with Khalil Herbert, who's got a great matchup this week, coming off a quiet week because, well, let's face it, Justin Fields ran for every single rushing yard that could be available to him in that game last week. So, Caruso, who would you rather have rest of season, D'Onta Foreman or Khalil Herbert?
I personally, at this point, would probably still go for D'Onta Foreman. And I know that might not be a popular answer because Herbert could easily take over. If David Montgomery gets hurt, like, Herbert is going to be, running back 1 in fantasy football. But that's because David Montgomery is still there. That's why I'm going to go with D'Onta Foreman, because we saw last week he's shown upside to just take over the lead role regardless of who's there. And he might not get the passing down work, but he still has a chance to be the running back 1 for the rest of the season. While I don't think Herbert, as much as we would love to see it, is going to take over. So I'm still going to stick with Foreman for now.
All right, it's a really good matchup coming up this week. If you want to plug and play a Bears running back, we'll talk more about them a little later. But Erickson, how about you? Would you rather have Khalil Herbert, who's been pretty strong these last 2 weeks up until week 9, which was a little bit of a bummer, or would you rather have D'Onta Foreman, 2 guys in 2 backfields that are a little muddy still with somebody else getting carries?
I'm taking Khalil Herbert here. Like, I understand the reasons for D'Onta Foreman and David Montgomery kind of standing in Khalil Herbert's way, but David Montgomery's been in the situation the entire season, and yet Khalil Herbert continues to score more fantasy points than he does because he's just better. And he scores more rushing yards. So even on fewer carries, Khalil Herbert's still getting it done, and this Bears offense is really starting to hit its stride. The Bears have the number 1 strength of schedule for running backs. So yeah, David Montgomery's going to be involved, but so is Khalil Herbert. And they're a team that wants to run the football. I mean, Justin Fields, despite how great he's been, you look at his player props, his passing yards, it's opening like 160 passing yards. Like, this offense is not becoming this pass-heavy attack, even with Justin Fields taking a massive step forward. So, Carolina's offense, if I can get rid of pieces in this offense, like, I will. Like, I don't necessarily feel like I need to have them. Whereas this Bears offense, especially the run game, you want pieces of it. So I'm going to go with Khalil Herbert here.
All right, there you have a split, which means I have to go ahead and break the tie, I think. So what do I do? Do I accept my own trade that I just laid out there? This is a weird position to be in. I think I lean Khalil Herbert because I like these next 2 weeks, especially against the Lions this week. And I'm trying to win right now. I'm trying not to get too far ahead of myself. And I do think the next 2 weeks, there's a better chance that Herbert's that guy that helps me win those games. But I'm a Foreman guy. Everybody knows I was the one who wanted to pick him up off the waiver wire first anyway. I'm surprised that Chuba was the dude right out of the gate. So we'll see how Mr. Hubbard works his way back into things. Let's get to another running back here who's been traded quite a bit on the Sleeper app. And of course, that's what we're talking about. These players were the most dealt on the Sleeper app. And here's one that just came back and everybody wants to unload him right away. But is that the right move? Cordarrelle Patterson, who had the mother of all angry runs the other day. Let me tell you, he smashed somebody at the goal line there. He looked pretty sharp in his first game back. It's astounding he could come back and be that useful right away. Now, a lot of the fantasy points were tied to the touchdown. So Andrew Erickson, I'm going to hit you with this one first. Do you want to buy, sell, or hold Cordarrelle Patterson?
I'm gonna hold Cordarrelle Patterson. I think that the idea behind selling him makes a lot of sense on the surface, where you look at, oh, well, he only played 39% of the snaps, like Tyler Allgeier rushed for more yards than he did. But again, we're going back to, this is a backfield where more than one running back can be productive because, like the Bears, the Falcons also want to run the ball as much as humanly possible. And Cordarrelle Patterson has been by far the best running back when healthy this season. Like Allgeier and Caleb Huntley have been fine and had their moments here and there, but we'll just watch the games. Like Cordarrelle Patterson is like a top 10 running back from an efficiency standpoint. Like I get that he used to play wide receiver, but he's good. He is a very good running back and he fits this system that Arthur Smith has set up in Atlanta very well. So I'm happy that I held on to Patterson if I bought him low when he was hurt. And his snaps could increase. Like he only played 39% of the snaps and he still was super productive. Like what if they increase? And this is what happened last year too. Everyone said to sell Patterson because he wasn't getting the snaps. And he just kept producing every single week. And then, oh, what do you know? Then maybe the snaps don't matter for an efficient player in an offense that is catering to his skill set and uses him the right way. So I'm going to keep Patterson. I get the idea of selling high on him, but I think I'm just going to ride it out.
That's fair. It's also interesting because I think all of us last year were waiting for the shoe to drop and when the wear and tear would catch up with him, and it did, because the second half it did. But this year it's a different set of circumstances because his injury came very early on, and now we're in the stretch run. So just curious, Alex, for you buying, selling, or holding Cordarrelle?
Well, I think you just said it right there. I think that for me, he's a buy. I mean, we don't have to rely on him for a whole season now. He got to take the last few weeks off with that injury, and now he's going to be the starting running back on one of the most run-heavy teams like in NFL history at this point. I mean, this team just refuses to pass the ball no matter what, and that benefits Cordarrelle Patterson, who is going to see the most of the work because, yes, Caleb Huntley's nice and Tyler Allgeier is nice, but ultimately Patterson is that guy. He's their goal line back at the same time. So as long as he's healthy and we only have about half a season left, I think for me that he's going to be a borderline running back one for the rest of the way. He also has a pretty nice schedule coming up. He has a nice playoff schedule. Maybe we're getting a little bit too ahead of ourselves looking towards the playoffs, but I think that he's still the starting running back in the most run-heavy team in all of football right now, and that's something that I will always be buying in.
All right, let's test the waters here. I'm going to throw out some trade offers to you. Alex, Jeffrey Wilson Jr. for Cordarrelle Patterson. Who are you taking in that deal?
Oh, that's a tough one because I really like Jeff Wilson, but I'm going to stick with Patterson because we know he's going to get the guaranteed work. I mean, Jeff Wilson still, I think, has a career high of 125 carries. We've never seen him do much more than that. So I'm still going to stick with Patterson, especially with the offense and the work that he is going to get each and every week.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting one, too, because it seems like potentially in Miami, Jeffrey Wilson might be overtaking Mostert. Maybe, possibly. So. We've also got a matchup this week where you got Cleveland on the schedule. And we all know what the Cleveland Browns like to do, which is allow you to run the football all day long. So that's very tempting for this week coming up. Can I tempt you with that offer? Cordarrelle Patterson for Jeffrey Wilson Jr. Who would you rather have, Erickson?
I mean, I'm taking CPAT. I don't think it's particularly close, honestly.
Well, look at me. I'm Andrew Erickson. I don't think it's particularly close. I'm highfalutin today. Why don't you think it's so close? I want to know why.
I mean, Cordarrelle Patterson, Alex alluded to it. You know, he can be an RB. I mean, is Jeff Wilson going to be a top 12 running back? Like, I don't think so. Not in a committee and not in an offense that...
Well, hold on. Historically, Jeff Wilson does have touchdown equity. We've seen him give up, or we've seen him post that, 15-75 in a touchdown line many times in this theoretical offense. Now, granted, it's Miami now, not San Francisco.
The offense is way different. This offense throws way more than they did in San Francisco.
They do. They do.
More.
They also have potential for more points because they are so efficient and because they do throw the football. So there might be a lot of times where you get, Tyreek Hill down to the 5, and then next thing you know, you're handing the ball off to Jeffrey Wilson. Just saying. I mean, you can put that out there. And it's not like Cordarrelle Patterson has this long history of durability, and Mostert's ahead of him, who doesn't have a whole lot of history of durability himself. So I'm throwing out all these things to see if
Jeff Wilson doesn't have a long history of durability either. Like, none of these guys have been he's got 300 carries, locked and loaded. Like, none of these guys honestly might be there at the end.
Okay, I'll up the ante. Okay, you made it clear. Let's go for this one. I'm going to use his teammate against him, Tyler Allgeier and Chuba Hubbard for Cordarrelle Patterson. Is that a deal you would take for Patterson?
No, because Allgeier is behind Patterson, and Chuba Hubbard has no role guaranteed when he comes back. Like, he could just be the backup on a really bad offense. So I'm going to see
Alex shaking his head. I feel like this is the kind of offer that's floating out there, though, where you kind of pair two guys together, where theoretically, Allgeier coming off his best game, right? Chuba looking like he might be back and all of a sudden working into the carry load. Like, this is a deal that I'm sure can be out there and had. So what side of this deal would you rather be on, Alex?
Yeah, I think I would definitely rather be on the CPAT side of the deal. I think the only team that's probably going to accept that trade is the team that probably lost both Breece Hall and Javonte Williams, on the same team, and they're just absolutely desperate at running back. But I think that CPAT's value, as long as he's healthy, is going to be a borderline running back 1 level, and I think that I have to take that rather than hoping he gets injured and that Tyler Allgeier becomes more valuable.
Yeah, I think you just mentioned all of Andrew Erickson's teams. I think he's got that exact problem. At least he had Breece Hall in all of them, that's for sure. Let's continue on here with some of the guys. They have their buy low and sell high candidates. And remember, if you need help with finding trades, we've got the tools for you over fantasypros.com/myplaybook. Trade Central is open. It's a fantastic tool. The Trade Finder is out there too, but Trade Central will go there and help you find the right partners, find the right combinations and stuff. If you can't figure out what to do, it'll help you with the bye weeks too. So go out there and check it out. Again, you can download the My Playbook app. There's still plenty of time for the tools to help you get over the hump, get over these remaining bye weeks into championships. The waiver assistant is there too. So go to fantasypros.com/myplaybook or just download the app. The app is the way to go. You get all the news for your teams as well. Or remember, 6 free premium months, fantasypros.com/offers. You get that too. And that makes everything a lot easier, and you get to use all these amazing tools at My Playbook. So let's get the buy low RBs of the week. Alex, you're the guest. Who is the name for you to buy low on?
My number 1 buy low is Antonio Gibson, who I think is just an absolute smash buy right now. And the biggest thing here is J.D. McKissic is out seeing a neck specialist. He just missed, the last game with a neck injury. But what people don't talk about enough is J.D. McKissic actually missed the last 5 games last year with a neck injury. And as long as he's out, Antonio Gibson is going to see all the passing down work. And Antonio Gibson has been targeted at the 3rd highest rate among all running backs per route, which is only behind Austin Eckler and Alvin Kamara so far. Gibson played 57% of the snaps last week. He's been more explosive than Brian Robinson. And if you just want, consistency every week, even with J.D. McKissic, Antonio Gibson has finished inside the top 30 running backs in 8 of his 9 games this year, seeing at least 4+ targets in 6 out of 9. As long as McKissic is out, I think that Antonio Gibson is going to be a high-end running back too, and there's possibility that McKissic misses the rest of the year. So I'm taking advantage before people realize that.
Yeah, I think Gibson could do a lot of good for his stock out there in the open market if they decide to move on from him. I think a lot of teams would be interested in Gibson. Gibson's been a really strong finisher in the 2 years that he's been in the league. I think people forget that every single year for some reason. I don't know why, but they do. So we'll see what happens there with him. That's a good one. How about you, Erickson? Who are you buying low on at RB in week 10?
Yeah, I'm looking at the Chicago Bears backfield, and I really think that both running backs are actually interesting buy low guys because Justin Fields obviously blow up last week, taking all the rushing production, the touchdowns. Cole Kmet has scored 3 touchdowns over the last 2 weeks, so you haven't really seen these running backs really pop off any worthwhile fantasy production. But, as much as I'd like to say just is Khalil Herbert's the clear buy, and I still think I prefer Herbert just based on what they've done over the last 4 weeks. Herbert's averaged 6.2 yards per carry to Montgomery's 3.7 yards per carry. He has more rushing yards.
I mean,
he's the better back.
You have to be blind not to know he's the better back by watching these games.
Exactly. But I also can't be agnostic to the idea that Montgomery still played 70% of the snaps the last 2 weeks. Like, that is still a factor that you have to consider. And Herbert is facing an uphill battle because they're just not giving him as many opportunities as Montgomery. I mean, Montgomery has played 107 snaps versus Herbert's 43 snaps the last 2 weeks. And yet Herbert still has more rushing yards. Like, it's just like super, so it's super frustrating. So I kind of want to view it as a situation where whoever you can get like lower, like I don't like in rest of season rankings, they're actually back to back RB28 and RB29. I think Herbert's actually ranked one spot ahead of Montgomery. It really depends on your league and who is valued more. Like I've tried to trade Devin Montgomery for Khalil Herbert straight up. It did not work out. So it really does depend. I think Herbert I still prefer because like you said, I think that he's a better running back. Next 3 weeks or next 3 of their 4 opponents, Lions, Falcons, Packers. For the Chicago Bears. So I was trending towards Herbert potentially taking over this backfield. It hasn't happened quite yet, but I mean, if I have to make a bet, put all my chips in, I'm going to do it on Khalil Herbert because this Bears team is starting to get some confidence. They're playing really well. And I think that ultimately Herbert might be able to get them over the hump if they use him a little bit more than Dave Montgomery. And I think too, they've only the last 2 weeks, despite the snaps, Montgomery only has 6 more carries than Khalil Herbert. Like, that's not that big. So the snap share is massive, but when you actually look at the actual workload, it's really not as big. So I think Khalil Herbert's still the guy I want. Dave Montgomery, if you can get him cheaper, then I like it too because the schedule is very good.
And Herbert was clearly in all those mock drafts we did in August and July, one of those guys we just go over and over again, we'd fight over because he was the better running back. He was basically free. And this is what you have to do going into next year too. Learn from these things. If you didn't have shares of Montgomery or Ken Walker or any of those players, start to look for those guys that are the better talent at RB and put your faith in eventually talent winning out in those scenarios. Because eventually, typically in the NFL, it does. Unless, of course, you're Kadarius Toney and they hate you and they trade you to Kansas City. Then it's different. All right, let's get to the guys you want to sell high at the RB position. Let's stick with you, Andrew. Who's on that list for you this week?
Yeah, I think Raheem Mostert is the guy that you probably want to try to move on from as soon as humanly possible. You know, he was someone that I could just never buy into the entire season because I'm like, he's going to get hurt. Like, I know they hate Chase Edmonds, but I just like could never move him up high enough in the rest of season rankings that made sense. And then this happened with Jeff Wilson. I was like, all right, this is why I was afraid to move him up too high because he could be easily replaced. And that's basically what we saw in week 9. They split carries, drives, and snaps. Jeff Wilson actually played more snaps, had more rushing yards, 51 versus 26. And he was also involved more as a receiver, had 3 targets, and actually ran more routes than Raheem Mostert did. So it was already a 50-50 split in Jeff Wilson's first game. So I think that, you know, Raheem Mostert's days are numbered as the starter in Miami. The fact that Mostert scored, I think is your like last attempt at, okay, like you can still kind of move off of him because he did still score and he was still involved enough that he does still have some value that you can trade. But, you know, he's not a guy that we all were ever excited. I mean, a 30-year-old running back with a major injury track record. I mean, he's still RB22 in the rest of season rankings, which is well ahead of Jeff Wilson. So, I mean, I just trade Mostert for Wilson straight up right now, like, do it. Because next week,
this week, I mean, Mostert is 23, Wilson's 27 right now against Cleveland. And I understand there might be enough to go around against Cleveland. So look, this is definitely the week to trade him too, because after this too, you get the bye week. But then they come out against Houston after that, another great matchup.
And then they get the Chargers a little bit later on too. Yeah,
but like most trade deadlines, you know, I know as we've extended the fantasy season here, I believe most trade deadlines are still week 13 right now. I think that's typically what we're doing. Yeah. So that being said, like time is running out here. Get all the juice you can out of Mostert if you can get it, and then hope to sell it off, because if there's one matchup or 2 matchups remaining for him that really can get all that, and as soon as you get anything good out of Mostert of those games, you move on from it, especially because week 14, that's when all the buys happen. That's when people are going to need a lot of bodies, and Mostert will be somebody that people want, because I don't believe they're not in buy again. No, they're in 11, right? So there you go. Let's go to your guy to sell high on it, RB. Alex, who is it?
Yeah, I had a tough time with this one because I think Mostert is definitely the number one sell high. I think Andrew hit on a lot of great points, especially when Jeff Wilson, while being on the team for about 5 days, outsnapped him. I think that's number one. But the number 2, sell high running back for me is Devin Singletary. And I just can't get on the Singletary train, and maybe shame me for doing so. But, Devin Singletary so far this season is actually top 5 in the NFL in pass routes run. And then the Bills went out and traded for Nyheim Hines. They still have James Cook. and now they traded for someone as dynamic as Nyheim Hines. And to me, that says that they just do not trust Devin Singletary in the passing game, drafting, a pass catching running back and then trading for one at the deadline. I just don't think that they want to use Devin Singletary. And I know that, he plays a lot of snaps and that looks really nice, but at the same time, he's played 8 games this season and he's had just 2 games with double-digit fantasy points. And I just don't see where he's going to continue to be very productive, especially with a game-changing, running back in the passing game like Nyheim Hines, and also with this Josh Allen potentially elbow injury. We don't know what that's going to look like for the rest of the season. I just can't see where, Singletary is all of a sudden going to be a league winner again like he was last year.
I wonder if you can spin the Josh Allen injury into fake value for Devin Singletary too. If maybe they have to run the football a little more. That might be your way out of Singletary, but keep it brief. Don't write those trade essays. Nobody wants to read your trade essays. The trade should speak for itself. I hate the dissertations on why you should make this trade. No one should ever do those things. Let's get to the wide receivers here, and let's start with the most traded guys over on the Sleeper app. And Jakobi Meyers has a bye this week, so a lot of people trying to move on. Also, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of unhappiness with the Patriots offense, and I can't think of 2 better people to talk about this with. So let's talk about Jakobi Meyers. Erickson, you want to buy, sell, or hold Jakobi Meyers?
I'm 100% selling Jakobi Meyers.
Really?
I'm selling Jakobi Meyers. I mean, this quarterback play has just been atrocious for the Patriots this year. I know Bailey Zappi had looked good for the 2 games that he had started against really bad defenses, against the Browns and the Lions. Mac Jones has taken a major step backwards this year, just not reading the defenses. I don't know what they're doing on offense, honestly. It's just a mess. Jakobi Meyers has obviously been a staple of this offense, but when you look at his production, when he's had his spike weeks, he's been scoring touchdowns. And we know that that's not really part of Meyers' game long term. Like, he's never really been a guy that scored a lot of touchdowns. So we finally got some touchdown regression early on the season and not expecting it long term. You look at the Patriots over their next 4 weeks, obviously including the bye week, they have a bottom 3 schedule for wide receivers. Like, the schedule was easy in the first half of the year for the Patriots. Now it's going to get a lot tougher. They still haven't faced the Bills yet. Like, that's a big issue for the Patriots. So Jakobi Meyers, I just don't think that he's a difference maker when it comes to fantasy football. And we're going to talk about some other names here that I would just much rather have than Jakobi Meyers, even if they all play very similar roles on different offenses.
All right. Alex Caruso, Meyers has been very steady. He has shown that he can play with both quarterbacks should another change be imminent for the Patriots. So what do you want to do with Meyers? You want to buy, sell, or hold him?
I'm going to hold Meyers. I just don't see that there's many people, whether it's on the Twitter streets or in Discord or anywhere, where people are really excited about Jakobi Meyers in general. So I just don't think that people realize how high his trade value could be, which means I just don't think I'm going to get as much in return as I would like for someone like Jakobi Meyers, who is still averaging over 7 targets per game this year. I'm still wary of this passing game and whoever the quarterback is. That's why I'm not buying, because a lot of people aren't super in on him, but I think he's worth a hold. He's finally scoring touchdowns. He's done so in 3 of his last 5 games. And if maybe he can turn it around and get that positive touchdown regression that he's been so due for because of his lack of ability to do so for the first couple of years, I think to me that he's a hold, especially because of how many targets he's averaging. And I just don't think his trade value is high among consensus like it should be. And for that reason, I'm going to hold.
And Andrew, you just don't think that the extra week is enough to fix what is the Patriots offense, I assume, right?
Do you think it is enough?
No, I don't.
It's definitely not.
I'm laying it on pretty thick here, Bob.
If it wasn't for the Colts offense running what was basically as bad as a Kendall Hinton-led offense on Sunday, the Patriots would have lost that game against any other team because of how bad they played on offense.
Oh, goodness gracious. All right, here we go. So let's get to the trade market. Now, these are guys rest of season ranks that are really close to each other. So let's talk about it. Jakobi Meyers or Christian Kirk? Caruso, who would you rather have rest of season? Because Kirk hasn't been as consistent these last few weeks as Jakobi Meyers has.
Yeah. Oh, for me, it's definitely Christian Kirk. I think that, yes, he has not been as consistent, but I think a big reason for that is his schedule. He's played a couple of really tough matchups for him. I mean, he played Houston, Indianapolis, the New York Giants, and Denver in 4 straight weeks, who are all top 6 toughest defenses against wide receivers. His schedule is about to open up. He's still the number 1 target for a still improving Trevor Lawrence. And I don't think there's any other guy in this passing game that has really stepped up. And for me, that means that Christian Kirk is going to be the wide receiver 1. His schedule is about to get a lot easier for the rest of the year. And for me, that he actually scores a little bit more touchdowns and gets me a little bit more excited. So I would rather have him over Jakobi Meyers.
Does get tougher for him in the playoffs, though. He gets Trayvon Diggs and then the sauce, weeks 15 and 16 back to back. All right. So, Erickson, I feel like it's a foregone conclusion. You kind of spoiled the fun here, but I'll ask it anyway. Kirk or Meyers, who would you rather have rest of season?
Yeah, I'm going with Kirk. I like his schedule coming up. No, not necessarily the playoff schedule, but over the next 4 weeks, it's the easiest schedule per PFF for wide receivers. So I'm going with Kirk. And really, that's the thing with Kirk. It's just been matchups dependent. Like same thing with Trevor Lawrence. You look at Trevor Lawrence game logs, he's a top 12 quarterback in 5 games, outside the top 20 in the other 4 games. It's because, bad defense. Top 12 quarterback. Good defense. Outside the top 20. Like that's exactly what it's been with Kirk. You play him in good matchups. You don't play him in bad matchups because he's not, a top 20 real life wide receiver.
All right, let's go to another one. Erickson, how about if I offered you for Jakobi Meyers, Terry McLaurin? Who would you rather have rest of season?
Look, I think that you're getting similar players when it comes to targets. McLaurin has been Taylor Heineke's number 1 receiver, which was different, which like when Carson Wentz was quarterback. I don't think that the team is going back to Carson Wentz at any point this season, even if he is healthy. I think they're just going to roll with Heinicke, and that means McLaurin's going to be the target leader for this offense. And obviously that comes with a lot of bust games. But I like the boom games with McLaurin. I think McLaurin has a higher weekly ceiling because of how they use him downfield, and I think he's still the clear alpha in that offense. Jahan Dotson's still unhealthy. Logan Thomas, he's basically disappeared in this offense. So with only Curtis Samuel really his main competition for targets, I think I'm going to continue to roll with McLaurin here. Same
thing for you, Alex?
Yeah, I think that McLaurin sees a lot of empty targets. Similar to Jakobi Meyers, I don't think either of them see a ton of super accurate, great targets that you're looking for these guys who I think are both exceptional route runners. But McLaurin is more a guy that is going to score in the end zone. Like Andrew mentioned that, with Curtis Samuel's really his only competition at this point. I'm going to trust the playmaker. I'm going to trust one of the best route runners in the NFL with Terry McLaurin here, but I think it's a little bit closer than people realize.
If you got points for targets, the next guy on this list would be the wide receiver 1 overall. It's Chris Godwin. Oh my goodness, double digits every single week. It is glorious. Conversion rate, a little tricky. I mean, he's catching a fair amount, but, the lines of, 7 for 11 for 45 yards are just really not getting me up in the morning. But let's talk about it. Do you want to buy, sell, or hold Chris Godwin? Erickson, you get Seattle this week, then the bye, then Cleveland, New Orleans, San Fran. That's what Godwin's got ahead of him. So do you think now is the time to buy Godwin and things start to pick up for the Buccaneers? Because I feel like we've been saying that for about a month, and I still feel like it's not happening.
I'm selling Chris Godwin. I think that he's a prime sell high because you hit the nail on the head. We're talking about the target. Like people obsessed with that targets. Like I'm one of those people. I love seeing the double-digit targets.
This guy right here.
Yeah,
Andrew
exactly.
Erickson, wait, I got to point this way. This guy right here, obsessed with targets.
Exactly.
Now
and that's why I think that
right?
you can sell Chris Godwin because he has 46 targets over the last 4 weeks, which is 11.5 per game. He is the wide receiver 35 in points per game. So the only thing that can change really, because he can't get more volume. It's literally impossible for Chris Godwin to see more volume than he's seeing right now. So that's maxed out. So his efficiency has to improve. But why is it going to improve? Like he's had good matchups. He had the best matchup on paper against the Rams, who are dead last in terms of fantasy points led wide receivers, not named the Falcons. And he got double the targets. And he had basically 0 yardage to show for it. Another great matchup this week against the Seahawks. Like their zone coverage. Like he's going to eat in the slot. He's going to get 10 targets. Well, he's going to catch 5 balls for 50 yards. And especially in half-point scoring, that's horrible. He only has 4 targets inside the 10-yard line this season. So they're not using him in the red zone. They prefer Mike Evans. They prefer Cade Otton. They prefer these other... Russell Gage has more red zone targets than Chris Godwin does.
Now that Julio Jones has somehow found his way back to the field, too, don't be surprised if he's not a guy that they look at there, too. He's got 0 touchdowns on the year, Chris Godwin. Yep. We are in week 10.
Yeah, and I just don't think that, Brady's touchdown rate is very low. It's the lowest of his career this season. And for us to project, it's going to obviously bounce back. Yeah, it'll bounce back maybe a little bit, but it's not to the length of, Brady may not throw for 30 touchdowns this year. Like, that's probably going to, he threw for 40 last year, and that's why Chris Godwin's so effective, because he was catching touchdowns. But that's just not going to happen here. So Chris Godwin, look, he's a rest of season ranked wide receiver 13. I'm going to try to flip him for Amon-Ra St. Brown. I'm going to try to flip him for a Seahawks receiver. Like, that's who I want for Chris Godwin because I think he still has enough of the usage where people are like, this is really good. But when you actually look at the production, it's like, he's just like shiny Deontay Johnson. Like that's really what we're looking at with Chris Godwin here. Like, I'm sorry to admit it. And as someone that liked Godwin, I was buying the targets early on in the season, but eventually you have to do something with them. And when you don't, it's like this guy's maxed out. And I don't think the efficiency is really going to dramatically improve just based on the state of the Bucs offense right now.
You've been spending far too much time with me, Erickson. Now you're starting to sound like me. I feel like we had an argument about this, 3 weeks ago on a live stream where we talking about targets. Like, eventually, I don't care. You've got to convert them into fantasy points. So now you care. Now week 10, you care.
Well,
You hit your threshold.
Yes, I care now.
You have I have less patience because I'm old. That's the problem here. Caruso, how about you? With Godwin, I mean, Andrew has laid out all of the case about trying to move on from Godwin at this point. And you can, because theoretically in fantasy circles, when you look at volume is king. And Godwin is the king of kings right now when you think about that.
Yeah, I think volume eventually always regresses, and I think we've all learned in our lifetimes that you don't ever bet against Tom Brady, in a low touchdown rate. Eventually, that is going to regress to the mean. And for the previous 3 years, Chris Godwin has been a top 15 wide receiver in points per game every year for the last 15 years. The touchdowns have not been there. I get it, but Chris Godwin is a buy for me. He's been nothing but productive when on the field, whether it's Jameis Winston or it's Tom Brady. This is the least productive that he's been, and he's commanding targets at least. Mm-hmm. I'm still a volume truther. I think that volume is king. If you want to sell him, go ahead. But, Andrew, I will gladly buy him off your hands because I think that they're going to eventually start to throw for more touchdowns and figure this offense out. We saw it just 2 years ago in their Super Bowl run when they turned it on after their bye week. A bye week does not solve anything, but anytime you put a week off in Tom Brady, I think good things usually happen to those teams. So I'm going to be buying Chris Godwin and hoping that he finally finds the end zone.
Target patience clearly has some connectivity to age too, because obviously I have the least amount. Andrew has finally lost his, but you still have it.
A little bit. I still
have that hope. God bless you. You keep us young. All right, let's get to some of these trade offers that we have here on the table. How about Chris Godwin or Chris Olave? Which Chris would you rather have, Caruso?
I would rather have Chris Olave. I love Chris Godwin, but Olave is just the man to me. And especially with Michael Thomas now out for the season, we have not seen Jarvis Landry healthy, since week 1 at this point. And Chris Olave is going to command targets. He is leading the NFL in air yards per game, just ahead of Tyreek Hill. Production is going to come. Rookies always get better in the second half of their season, and he is the only guy they're going to throw to. And it's been a more productive offense than we would expect with Andy Dalton. Even if they go back to Jameis, I think that's still productive for Chris Olave. I am definitely buying him, and I really like him over Chris Godwin at this point.
All right, same thing to you, Olave or Godwin. And then obviously Olave off this past week with Baltimore, no touchdowns there, only 10 fantasy points. Maybe this is a nice time here, back-to-back weeks, which were a little underwhelming. Maybe it's a good time to pull off a deal like this, Andrew.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I can move Godwin for Chris Olave. I feel great because Chris Olave's seen tons of volume too, except he's producing. Like, he has scored more fantasy points than Chris Godwin has. So that's, there are players that you can have your volume and eat it too with production. And that's the case with Chris Olave. So I would take Olave here for sure.
Wide receiver 16 and half PPR. But a lot of people don't realize that. Just a lay person playing fantasy doesn't realize exactly where Chris Olave ranks at this point. All right. How about Chris Godwin or Tyler Lockett? Two volume kings here. Andrew Erickson, who would you rather have rest of season?
Look, man, I've been wrong about the Seahawks like this entire process, like going into the season. So, and that's one of the things I want to take the L on, just like being wrong about Geno and DK and Lockett.
In all fairness, the league was wrong about Geno. Okay. So I don't think you should beat yourself up about it. I mean, in fact, the league was wrong about Geno several times. So don't beat yourself. Don't lose any sleep over it. Yeah,
well, this is a chance for me to, make up for it. And I would rather have Lockett rest of the season. Like, he plays on a more productive offense. He has another alpha in his offense that he competes for targets with too. Like, Godwin competes with Mike Evans. Lockett competes with DK Metcalf. Lockett scores more touchdowns. And he's probably going to keep scoring more touchdowns because he plays in a better offense. Like, Geno Smith has been playing better than Tom Brady has been. And I know you don't want to bet against Tom Brady, but right now it's like, should you be betting against Geno Smith? Like, I don't know. Like, if you keep betting against him, it's like, okay, like, eventually we're going to come around and be like, he's been playing pretty good. It's interesting because we get to see these guys play each other this week. So I'm going to go with Lockett
here. That's right. If I had put that in a fortune cookie for you back in August and it said, you're going to believe in Geno Smith more than Tom Brady in week 10, you probably say something went crazy wrong here. How about you, Alex? Looking at Tyler Lockett or Chris Godwin, who would you rather have rest of season?
I think I'm going to go for Chris Godwin, and I think a lot of it comes down to 5 weeks from now, once we get into December. I'd feel really dumb if all of a sudden I said I'm going to bet on Geno Smith and Tyler Lockett when Chris Godwin goes on to be a wide receiver one for the next 4 or 5 weeks. So as much as like all the tea leaves are saying let's trust in Geno, and you should trust in Geno. I'm still going to trust in Chris Godwin. Since week 3, Chris Godwin has had 5 games of double-digit targets. Tyler Lockett has 0. Tyler Lockett has been more productive. He has been more efficient. But I think Tyler Lockett has a little bit more boom-bust type games, and I'm going to trust that Godwin, the touchdowns are going to come with Tom Brady. I'm going to lean on him and disagree with my good friend Andrew here.
Well, he's got a heck of a playoff schedule, though. Cincinnati, Arizona, and Carolina. That's it. And if you hate your life and you play week 18 and you've done all this for no reason to get to a championship in week 18, he gets Atlanta. But
Exactly.
Cincinnati, Arizona, Carolina, that's certainly a good theoretical time for Chris Godwin. We shall see what happens. Now, before we get to our listener mailbag and our fun 3 and out, where we take your questions, let's get to some of the buy lows at wide receiver. Alex, why don't you start us off? Who's your buy low at wide receiver for week 10?
I don't think this player is just the number 1 buy low wide receiver. I think he's probably the number 1 buy low player in all of fantasy football right now, and it's Amon-Ra St Brown. Going back to the volume, Amon-Ra St Brown is the 2nd highest target per route run rate in the entire NFL. The other players in the top 5 are Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, CeeDee Lamb, and Stephon Diggs. Amon-Ra St Brown has also seen 9+ targets in every healthy game this season. TJ Hawkinson is gone, which should open up even more targets for Brown. DeAndre Swift cannot stay healthy, which could also be more targets for Amon-Ra St Brown. I mean, this is still the guy who just set the NFL record for most consecutive games with 8+ catches and a touchdown in a row. The volume has still been there. The touchdowns have not, but I think the touchdowns are going to come, especially without TJ Hawkinson. DeAndre Swift cannot stay on the field. I wouldn't be shocked if he had a run similar to what he had last year over the last 6 weeks. The volume is going to be there, and I think that he is an excellent buy low candidate, especially now that he's healthy. As long as he can stay on the field, I am all in on Amon-Ra St Brown, but I also might be all out at the end of the fantasy season when Godwin and Amon-Ra St Brown score no more touchdowns. But I'm going to lean into the volume here.
No, I think it's a great call. Erickson, who's a buy low wide receiver for you in week 10?
Yeah, so the only people that are tilting more than Cortland Sutton managers are the ones that manage Gabe Davis because it's been the 2nd straight week where he's basically just done absolutely nothing. 2 catches for 33 yards despite having some decent volume again for the 2nd straight week. He had 5 targets in week 9. But looking at the peripherals, 120 air yards. He played 95% of the snaps, 98% route participation. And those are the peripheral numbers I want to look at when it comes to wide receivers in plus matchups. Like, look, we talked about this on a lot of the shows last week, that the Jets matchup was not good for Gabe Davis. Like, we knew the Jets' strengths were their perimeter cornerbacks. So I'm not really surprised that, a boomer bust wide receiver busted against 2 of the better perimeter cornerbacks in the NFL. And there was a game where Josh Allen the Bills lost the game. It wasn't a traditional Buffalo Bills performance on offense. So I'm not really surprised Gabe Davis had a bad game. But people are just I want to drop Gabe Davis. He sucks. All this stuff. It's guys, he plays wide receiver. There are so many receivers that fall in the bucket of how volatile he is week to week. But the thing about Gabe Davis is we've seen him have this ceiling that not a lot of wide receivers can deliver in 1 week, where he can score 30, 35 fantasy points. So next 3 weeks, the Bills play the Vikings, the Browns, and the Lions. Yeah, I want a guy playing on every down with Josh Allen as his quarterback. Hopefully Josh Allen is healthy. So I'm buying low on Gabe Davis. He's basically, you can get him for so cheap right now because people are so done with Gabe Davis.
Well, they're done and they're worried. What if this elbow injury is, this might be rock bottom buy time for Gabe Davis.
Yeah.
Not even low. This is fire sale almost.
Yeah, I just think that he has the upside for him, I think, is worth whatever you have to send to get him, which I don't think is a lot because he's just been inconsistent and been very boomer bust. And the Josh Allen injury just kind of makes it that much easier to get Gabe Davis and acquire him. You can just you could trade Mecole Hardman for Gabe Davis, I bet. Just sell him off. All right, sick. I'll take Gabe Davis.
You might be able to do that, especially the way Hardman's been wrapping up touchdowns.
Exactly.
All right, so let's talk about other guys you want to sell high besides Mecole Hardman. Who else you want to sell high, Erickson?
I'm looking at Curtis Samuel. So basically, he had the long touchdown reception. He's basically been very dependent on big plays over the last 2 weeks. He's averaged 19.1 yards per reception, which is way different than what he was doing near the beginning of the season, where he was just Carson Wentz's dump off king. He was getting all the low targets near the line of scrimmage, but he only has 4 targets per game in the last 2 weeks, 15% target share. He only has 6 catches the last 2 weeks, and so the big play dependency, Jahan Dotson coming back. He's facing the Eagles in week 10, just like a secondary that just suffocates opposing wide receivers, whether it's the slot, perimeter, it doesn't really matter. I mean, Taylor Heineke against the Eagles is just not something I really want to be a part of. So, and Washington's schedule rest of the season is not good. Bottom 5 rest of the season per FantasyPros strength of schedule tool for wide receivers. And Curtis Samuel's just not, he's a floor play every single week, it seems like. So anytime that 4 guys scores a touchdown, especially have a big play, I look at it as an opportunity to sell. So I would move Curtis Samuel for Gabe Davis, Cortland Sutton, all these types of guys that are buy lows for me.
All right. How about you, Caruso? Who is somebody in week 10 you're looking to sell high on at wide receiver?
I think people are going to hate this one, but I think his value is just going up so much to the point that I'm going to sell him. It's Juju Smith-Schuster for me. I think the narrative has changed so much where people were ready to drop Juju about 3 or 4 weeks ago, and then he had 2 40-yard touchdowns and then played arguably the worst slot defense in the entire NFL in Tennessee this week. Don't get me wrong. Juju is good. But Juju's also played one team that's in the top 10 against wide receivers. And the biggest reason I'm looking to sell him is kind of looking towards the playoffs. He plays a top 10 team against wide receivers in each of his final 5 games in the fantasy season that ends in week 17, and plays a top 6 team in each of his last 4 matchups, which includes Denver twice in weeks 14 and 17, who is the number 1 team versus wide receivers. I really like Juju, but he's had a couple big plays that I think have elevated him too much, and people are starting to think that he's like borderline wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. And if I can sell him for someone like Amon-Ra St. Brown, I am doing that all day, every single day at this point.
Yeah. Look, Juju was a guy that I wanted to sell a couple weeks ago off that one game. And then another one, now another one, but you make a great point. Twice against Denver down the stretch. That's going to be tough. A couple other tough matchups there. Let's hit up the mailbag where you guys ask the questions and we give the answers. And of course, and this 3 and out, they all come from our Discord channel. So go hit us up at fantasypros.com/chat, where you can go and, again, remember, fantasypros.com/offers. When you sign up to be a premium member of Fantasy Pros, you get access to the stages, to the AMAs, to fun things like this. And I take your questions and I put them on the show and I make you famous. Let's start with Chris Cross, who makes me want to jump into this question. Trade away CPAT for Dallas Goedert or Kittle in the PPR. Erickson, is this a deal you want to make?
Yeah, I mean, if this particular manager has really bad tight ends and they feel better at their running back room, then I think that's a fine trade to make. I think I prefer Goddard because I think there's less mouths to feed in the Eagles offense, where it's just Devontae Smith and AJ Brown versus Kittle, where it's Ayuk, Debo, and Christian McCaffrey. So I think I'd prefer Goddard out of those 2 tight ends. But yeah, if you don't want to stream tight end, both those tight ends have also had their bye weeks already, and CPAT hasn't had his bye week yet. So yeah, I think that it makes sense if you just want to stop streaming tight end.
This one's from Yoke 3D Barb, and I think it's a picture of Barb from Stranger Things here in
Yoked
the avatar.
Barb.
Oh, it's
Yoked Barb.
But there's a 3 there. That's not an E. That's a 3.
That's how the cool Joe. Like that's how the cool kids use the letter E, is they make it a 3 instead.
You telling me I'm not cool? I'm sorry.
You're just not with the times, man. Come on.
I'm not, man.
You mean targets, dude? Targets.
No cap.
With the.
I'm old now.
The 3 and not the E.
I guess I didn't know that. See that? And my children have been teaching me all these other things, and I was like, these are words? I don't know, but they are. So I'm learning these things. So 12-team PPR, sitting tied for 3rd, but not comfortable. The team is weak at wide receiver, getting carried there. Send Eckler and Kelsey, receive Chubb, Adams, D-Hop, and Dulcich. Caruso, what do you think about this haul?
Oh man, I struggle with this one, but ultimately I think I'm going to have to take it. I mean Nick Chubb has been a top 5 running back this season. If he holds that, I think this trade is going to be worth it. You're going to get arguably 2 wide receiver 1s in both Devontae Adams and DeAndre Hopkins, and I'm a believer in Greg Dulcich. I think it's very hard to give up Travis Kelce with how awesome he has been for every single fantasy team that has owned him this year. But I'm a big believer in Greg Dulcich. I mean, he had the 3rd most receiving yards of all time through a player's first 3 games. And even though he's played just 3 games, I think he's 3rd or 4th right now in fantasy points per game as a whole. If he keeps that up, he has a nice schedule going forward. You know, Cortland Sutton has not been getting the targets that we want him to. I think that Greg Dulcich could be valuable. And if he's anywhere near, a top 12 tight end for the rest of the season, this trade is an absolute hammer. Yes, especially if you're, weak at wide receiver and you get 2 wide receiver 1s back.
I'm going to change my Twitter handle to Yoked Joe after the show with a 3 in it. So
yeah,
ready to go. All right. Who's your 19? Last one here. Would you trade a 2nd or 3rd round pick for Dalvin Cook? Half PPR in a 12-team league, 7-2, and the number one team with Sanders, Fournette, and Henry at RB, really looking to secure it. So are you willing to move picks, a second and a third round for Dalvin Cook to go all in, Erickson?
Yeah, because Fournette, you're not going to be able to start for much longer at the rate that he's going. He's declining rapidly, so you really want to have a safety net, and Dalvin Cook's already had his bye week. So, I would definitely want to do this.
All right, same thing for you, right, Alex, too? You're in for this?
Fantasy football is either you win or you lose. If you have a chance to win, go and win, because that one championship is pride you get to hold on to for the next decade plus, and you will never, ever lose that. If you have a chance to win, go out there and go win it.
I love it. Flags fly forever. Go all in, win. That's what are we doing here? We're going to try to hedge for next year? No, win now. That's what you got to do. And then learn something from the kids when they teach you the cool things like yoked with a 3 in it. Who knew? Who knew? All right. Great show today, gentlemen. As always, don't forget, everybody, go to fantasypros.com/offers. Go premium today with one of those offers out there. Get 6 free months of Fantasy Pros. Use the Trade Finder. Use Trade Central. Use the tools at My Playbook. Download the app. Sync your teams. They help out. Whether you're picking up guys from the waiver wire, looking for trades, setting lineups for teams that you just don't care about anymore because they're not going anywhere, but you don't want to be that person in the league that doesn't set a lineup. So many great features at My Playbook. Go check them out. I'm telling you right now. And of course, make sure you follow Alex Caruso too, at Alex Caruso, one of the rising stars in the fantasy industry for sure, and one of my favorite people in it too. And I don't just say that to anyone. It's true. So Alex, thanks so much for hanging out with us today here on the show. That'll do it for us, but the story of the game goes on. For Alex and for Andrew Erickson, I'm Joey P. We'll see you next time, you kids. Go get yoked.